Thank you for finding the NSE podcast on YouTube. To find links for our online hospitality security training, check out the video description below. Enjoy the Nightlife Security Podcast.
Welcome to the Nightclub Security Podcast, a professional resource for the nightclub security industry. Whether you're a nightclub bouncer, guard, owner, or operator, this is the podcast for you. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain. Let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. You listen to the Nightclub Security Podcast. This is your host, Manny Marquez. I'm here with nightclub security industry expert, Robert C. Smith. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, Manny. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. We are coming to you live from the JW Marriott here in downtown Los Angeles. This is actually our first visit to this hotel. Very nice hotel, right here near the LA Live Center.
What do you think? Do you like this place better or the Bonaventure?
I kind of like the Bonaventure. I miss the old stomping ground.
You like looking at the movie sets where they film these films, huh?
Yeah, I mean, usually when we come to LA, and if you haven't visited LA, there's normally a lot of filming activity going on in the city, and definitely by the hotel that we usually stay at, which is the Bonaventure, there's a lot of activity there. But yeah, this is a nice area. It was fun. I haven't actually walked the LA Live area, which is where the Staples Center is.
There's so much to see, and it's kind of funny. They've got it up with the Clippers. The Lakers are out on a road trip, and I was trying to think how fast and when they must transition from Clippers to Lakers.
Because both the Clippers and the Lakers share the Staples Center, and so they have to share the same arena, but all the collateral material and marketing material, banners, signs. I even think they have to change out the flooring.
Yeah. But even outside, where it's just a common area for people that can walk and just cruise in. You can cruise in off the street and walk through the whole LA Live area. And right now, it's all decorated with Clipper stuff. The time
and
is
Christmas
now.
stuff.
Yeah, Christmas and Clippers.
So they also had the skating rink set up.
The ice rink.
And the trees and kids and lots of activity here. So a lot to see and do around this part of town. We're actually in town in LA doing a California PSO training class. We're doing that for some of our clients, the Houston Hospitality Group, which have been some big supporters of our program, as well as 𝐏𝐸𝐬𝐿 Gentlemen's Club.
𝐏𝐸𝐸's one great place, but they've got the Houston group got 3 different venues represented in this training session.
So yeah, good to see those guys again, and also our good friends at Akbar, which we're actually doing the training. Jeff Wiley and his team allowing us to use their venue. So thank you very much, Jeffrey. We do appreciate the hospitality. All right, well, Robert, let's get into today's news topic. And actually, we're going to revisit a story that we brought to you. Well, we didn't bring it to you, but we talked about it a couple shows ago. And that was a shooting at 𝐏𝐻's in Las Vegas.
𝐏𝐻's in Bally's.
𝐿's, yeah, in the Bally's Hotel. And what happened was there was a... You want to just kind of summarize the story for
It's early
the
in the
audience?
morning, like 5-something?
5:45, I think it was.
5:45 in the morning. Now, remember, it's Vegas, folks. I know some of you are done and sleeping by then, but it's 5:45 in Vegas. This guy, Benjamin Fraser, goes to the club, wants to look inside. They say, yeah. They let him in. He comes back out, pays his cover, and goes back in. Some more time passes. He decides, I just don't want to be here. And an argument ensues at the front counter about getting his cover charge back.
And the reason why we're bringing the story back is because they actually released the video footage of what happened in the actual shooting. And we will put the video up on our show notes or a link to the video. And just a heads up, it is a bit graphic, so if you don't like watching that stuff, don't go look at it. But we are putting it on our website.
It's really, I think it's, for us, I think it can be categorized as educational just because of what we deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's definitely some things that some talking points that we can learn from watching this video.
The intriguing part as the video goes, and folks, when you watch it, do it 2 or 3 times, do it on full screen. But I'm sure one of the arguments will be what this guy's mental state was and what he was. Now, granted, 5:45 in the morning, what could his mental state be? We're going to consider he's drunk.
And apparently, according to a couple of the news stories, there was alcohol involved. He was on antidepressants.
So they got his blood work back.
And I believe they also mentioned he was on blood pressure medication. So he's got a pretty good cocktail, a good mix of chemicals going through his body.
So what I see first when Manny had me watch this and look at it again, The guy has some, he and watch the very first few seconds of this video, because you'll see his left hand, and you got to understand body language. His left hand reaches behind him, kind of underneath his rear pants belt, under his shirt. I think this is at the time when he pulls out the gun. He moves it to the front, almost by his left front pocket. Then he moves almost to walk back into the club or around the guard, and the guard steps in front of him, and that gun comes straight up from his left hand to the guard's neck or to the guard's head. The guard, I think, and Manny and I talked about it instinctually, just kind of grabs the gun.
Yeah, he tries to grab for the gun. There's a short struggle. The guard loses his footing during the scuffle and actually falls to the ground. And the one thing that I thought about that when I watched that, do you think he lost his footing, Robert, from watching that because of his shoes, or did he just trip up?
Well, I think it was the totality. I really believe that as they twist, and I'm watching it again, he grabs that gun, he twists, the guy pulls away, and I think he just loses his footing straight up, being almost thrown by this guy to the ground.
So as he loses his footing, he scoots away basically on his rear towards the opposite direction from the shooter. And then I think we see a second doorman come from off screen from another door.
The suspect, you'll see him back up a step and point and then pull the gun back like he's, okay, I just threatened you enough. But then the door opens and another guard comes in because they can hear the scuffle. And that's when the suspect now decides, I got another guy, it's 2-on-1, I'm going to shoot.
Yeah.
And he shoots the first
It's almost
guard.
as when he saw that second guy, he's like, okay, it's on now.
But notice this, to me, and remember, folks, 20 years of San Diego PD, I've seen a lot of these type of videos. I'm in no way, a mental expert, and I wasn't there. However, he points the gun once, pulls it back, points it again. This time the guy walks in, he shoots, but he puts his other hand up and goes two-hand, almost like a range shooting, like that's what he was taught to do, like he'd practiced doing that. He shoots twice, shoots once at the door, shoots once at the guy on the ground, hits him, shoots at the door guy that walked in the door, hits him. Then he casually puts the gun down to his side and starts walking out.
Very nonchalant, walks out. You change camera views. You're now looking at him walk into the casino floor, and then a patron, or I guess would be an innocent bystander, sees it.
Kenneth Brown is the guy's name.
Kenneth Brown comes and tackles from behind. You see a shot fired off as they fall.
It's kind of funny now that I look at it again. I don't mean it's funny. God bless Mr. Brown. But as the first video angle shows, he runs behind the suspect. You can tell it was an immediate reaction of Mr. Brown's in what he did. His cigarette is still hanging from his mouth, almost like he saw it. He's taking a puff of his cigarette. He left it in his mouth, and that's when he ran and jumped over the railing at this guy. And in the second view, you can see when he jumps on him, the gun goes off once. You can see the flash. He gets him down on the ground, and the gun goes off again a couple more times, and that's when guards tackle.
Yeah, and I think it was somewhere there where they were scuffling on the ground that fatal shot was actually fired is when they were on the ground struggling. And then you see multiple guards jump on the suspect and try to get the weapon away from him. Watching a video like this, Robert, it's obviously very disturbing, and it kind of, being somebody that's in the industry, gives you a little bit of a chill, because you just try to imagine yourself going through that scenario and what would I do, and what was a major point that you would take away from watching a video?
Two things, and I've worked on a couple of cases like this as an expert witness with a club, and this guard did something that was very instinctual. I don't think anyone should get mad at him. I don't think he's to blame at all. But when the gun came out and went to his head or neck, he instinctually grabbed it. Number one, we don't know what we would do. We don't know if our hands would go up in the air like, okay, don't hurt me, you can leave, you can walk away, or here's your cover. But the guard grabbed it, and I really think it was over when he's on the ground. He's in now a submissive, down on the ground position. The guy points the gun and then is going to leave, but then gets startled again when the second guard walks in. That's the first thing. The second thing, folks, if you can be the best witness you can be the best witness you can be. Mr. Brown, Kenneth Brown, is dead because he probably thought at the time, I can help and I can grab this guy.
And again, I think it was probably just an instinct. Like,
I do too.
I got to jump in. I got to do something to help these guys.
But what I want to make sure that is out there is, if you're not talking about these type of things, hey, Johnny, tonight at the door, ask your guy, if you listen to this, hey, Johnny, right now, what would you do if a car drove up, guy got out with a gun and talk about it. Because this is the kind of thing that nowadays with school shootings, mall shootings, college shootings, if you're not talking about it and it happens, your first instinct will be to duck and run, fight or flight. But if you're talking about it, maybe you can formulate a plan that can help you survive, whether it's to try to subdue the shooter or run away or hide or don't do anything. If you're not talking about it, you're not going to be ready.
Yeah,
for
and
it.
it's just like, in sports, you want to visualize the play. I mean, this isn't necessarily a play, but you want to think these things through in your head, and it might give you a little bit more some time and some room to actually come out alive.
As an operator, you mentioned, your view first, your second view, and I can appreciate that. Number one, your first view, I think, was you wouldn't give back the cover of a guy like that.
Yeah, I talked about when I first heard the story, the first thing that I drew away from the actual news piece was considering about how steadfast would I be if somebody asked for their cover back. And I think my initial reaction would to do what the guard did and not give his refund, not refund his cover charge.
But you've changed that?
Well, I mean, I would definitely think twice about it. What is this person capable of? Is this something that's worth $30? If it's a choice of giving $30 back and an incident not happening, what would I choose? And I would definitely choose just giving the $30 back. And again, it's hard to tell. We don't know all the details, but you find yourself in those scenarios where it's not so much about the $30. I don't think it's more about being right. And
yeah,
so that was my main point of bringing that up is, do I want to prove a point to a person and hold my ground, or is it a cost of doing business? Let's give this guy $30 back and be on our way. So that's what I drew from it.
I think this will lead. We got a comment a couple weeks ago from a gentleman from I think we mentioned in the last podcast. He's an armed guard, and this just goes to, again, maybe we'll do a podcast pretty soon about.
Yeah, we talked about
clubs.
Maybe exploring that topic of, having armed guards inside of a venue and what are the pros and cons. So that's something that's on our list of things to talk about. So again, if you're a team leader, if you're a manager, if you're the security supervisor, you might want to take a look at this video and discuss it with your team and make it a learning opportunity. And a lot of times the only thing we can do from a tragedy is learn from it. So that's our take on this video and this news piece. So Robert, we want to get into our main topic for today's show, and that topic is handcuffing. And we're going to talk about handcuffing within a nightclub security environment.
Just did a blog on that, so it's going to tie in real nice with our blog on our website.
So we have the blog posted on our website that you can also refer to. But we're going to talk about that topic, and we're going to take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we'll get into the main part of the show. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining us on our weekly podcast. Please like us on Facebook at Nightclub Security Consultants. All right, and welcome back. Today's show, we're going to get into a topic that a little bit of controversy around. We're going to be talking about handcuffs and using handcuffs within a nightclub security environment or a bar environment. This is actually, we've heard both sides of the fence on this from operators of whether or not they want to use handcuffs or allow their guards to use handcuffs. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Robert, first of all, I guess the main question is should you use handcuffs?
Absolutely. No doubt. Yes, yes, and yes. I'm sorry, you didn't hear me? Yes.
And yes?
Yeah, I hear. It's funny. You just mentioned something that struck a chord to me, because even today in our training here at ACBAR, when we discussed briefly detentions and citizens arrest, one of the younger guards, he said he wants to use handcuffs. He thinks they're important. Now, I didn't give him a whole spiel about it, but he said he thinks they're important. And his reason why was my exact reason that I teach nationwide. Why? He feels he can control that guy who's violent, going to be violent, has been violent. He can control him better, and it's easier once those cuffs are on. And he feels that that's safer. That's his gut instinct reaction. And that's, to your question, that's the answer why. Absolutely, bouncers should use handcuffs if they're truly trained and they have policies to do it, because they create a safer environment for the guard, the employees, customers, and that customer.
And there's a lot of information that we're going to be covering around this topic. So the first question we answered is yes, we should use handcuffs. Now the second question is going to be, Robert, what for an owner and operator, what's the biggest concern surrounding the use of handcuffs?
The first thing is many operators, and it's unfortunate, they're misinformed, and even some of the guards and some of the people listening right now, you don't think they're legal. They think only cops can use handcuffs.
So there's some question about the legality of, do I have the right to use handcuffs?
And it kind of coincides with our blog. There are two things that operators worry about. Number one, can my guys even legally detain people? Citizen detentions or citizen's arrest. And number two, I don't think they can use handcuffs because handcuffs are just, that's a police tool. Well, those two things, the answer is yes to both. And when an operator can just understand citizen's arrest is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. You guys do it all the time.
And even when we train on the topic of citizen's arrest, that's probably an area within the training that there's a lot of confusion. People don't know what's legal. They don't know their rights. They don't know what they can and cannot do.
And it's unfortunate because some of the people that should know this stuff don't. And I mean, some of the people I'm sorry, my law enforcement friends out there, look, they don't give you any training for private citizens and citizen's arrest. I had to do this research and do this work myself to find all these answers out years ago. The cops learn about what they can do to arrest, what they have to do regarding the Constitution of our country. But private citizens, if they didn't take some unique schooling about citizen detention, citizen's arrest, you got to find it yourself. And
yeah, there's not a lot of resources out there to get this information.
And nothing practical, and so many people are afraid to give the answers out. They think that they're putting themselves at risk by telling the truth.
Well, there's a lot of the concern is from a liability standpoint.
Let me put this to you. And when I tell an operator this, and as a former operator, Manny, if I said you and I were at Walmart walking through the parking lot, we saw a lady get knocked down, a guy grab her purse and run away, would you have any hesitation if you and I felt comfortable running after that guy and holding him for police?
You and I?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
And we'd hold the guy for the police, right?
Yes, we would.
Now we're in your bar, anywhere USA. We see a guy grab another guy, hit him in the nose and knock him down and try to run out. Can't we grab him and hold him for the police?
Legally, yes.
It's the same thing. But operators are just afraid, and I think the underlying theme of their fear, well, my guys are meatheads, and they're just going to bust this guy up. Well, then get some new guys and don't hire meatheads.
So part of it might be the confidence that they have in the talent and their staff and their capabilities of dealing with the situation. I think another part of it is they just don't understand their rights. The third part of it is they're worried about something bad happening, the liability side.
The civil liability when the guard does go accidentally too far or on purpose too far during this legal citizen detention and someone gets hurt and they get sued. Well, look, you're always liable. You're going to get sued. But if your guys can do it right, you lessen your chance of getting sued.
So I'm going to come back to this question just to clarify for the listener. The use of handcuffs by in-house security is legal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And remember, if you're listening, you think, well, Robert, you're not from Mississippi where my bar is. You're not from Providence, Rhode Island where my bar is. You're not from Seattle, Washington. Folks, it's the same. You can all use handcuffs. Go get them. Get your training, get your policies, and you can use them.
All right, Robert, my next question is it really necessary to have your security team carry handcuffs / with the potential to use them?
No, they're not. I mean, they're not the most important tool on the tool belt of the guard. You know, the flashlight, maybe a black light.
Because we know plenty of venues, plenty of teams, security teams who don't use handcuffs.
I would say a majority don't. I mean, around the country, honestly, and I've looked for teams that do. It's probably one bar in 100 bars has their guys with handcuffs, and out of those 1 bars, if you take 100 of those, many of those don't even keep the handcuffs on the belts of the guards. They'll put them in the manager's pocket, so they only come out at the discretion of management, which is okay. You got them just in case. So, no, it's not a mandatory thing. It's not something I say everyone needs. I will tell you that I believe in them. I believe that guards can be trained to use them, and I think they are a tool that can help you do the job better safer and smarter, but really necessary to do the job? No, they're not.
All right, before we get onto the idea of the training, because definitely there's training that needs to be done before you deploy the use of handcuffs. Let me ask you this, Robert. What about the policies around handcuffing? What should owners and operators be thinking about if they, one, use handcuffs or if they're thinking about using handcuffs?
Well, and to just make sure we're clear, we're talking handcuffs, metal, click handcuffs.
Not the furry kind.
Not the furry ones that I've seen you wear on occasion. No, and we're not talking zip ties.
Wait, what?
I don't ever recommend.
First of all, hold on. If I was ever to wear furry handcuffs, why would you ever see me in those? That's my question.
Well, webcams and what they are, and in video, if you didn't hear our last podcast.
Okay, so policies.
Well, here's the thing. First, make sure you understand what we're talking about today is handcuffs. Metal, $25, $35, $40 a pair handcuffs with a key, a short key, or the tactical longer key. Never have I ever recommended that a bar use zip ties, tie ties. Never. And the reason is you try to get them off, you got to have a knife or you got to have dulled, blunted scissors so you don't cut the person. You open yourself up to even more liability when this guy has a problem, has an issue, and you got to try to get him off quickly. Don't use zip ties. I'm talking handcuffs.
And another dangerous thing with zip ties that I've seen is as they're being used, oftentimes they're put on way too tight, and there's some major liability issues.
Well, and that's one of the things we'll talk about with the training. But now imagine that thing is on too tight, the zip tie, and you've got to try to get it off. They just don't slip right off. You got to get that knife and weasel it next to the skin. And
plus, when they get tight to the skin, I mean, they're actually like small razor blades against the skin.
Yeah.
So
we're not talking zip ties, handcuffs.
Yeah, handcuffs.
So you mentioned policies.
Okay.
I have written policies in our policy manual that we have that we sell to people. Hint, hint. We have a section on handcuffing, and one of the things that I have in there, I make sure that the policies are they're adaptable to what you want. You may get an owner that finally decides to say, okay, let's use them, but I want my managers to hold them. Okay, make that policy. Managers will carry handcuffs while they're on the floor. Okay, that's policy one.
So this is an example. Not every
Correct.
guard is going to have a set of handcuffs.
Or your policy could be, if you're working, part of your uniform of the day is you carry handcuffs in your back pocket. You're not going to put them over your belt. They're not going to be hanging out your back. You're not a police officer. You don't need to advertise that you have them. You're not going to hold them around and swing them like I've seen guys do. They are in your back pocket, and that's where they stay until they need to come out, period.
Okay.
So that may be one of your policies. Another one is no one can use the handcuffs unless the manager gives the approval. That could be a real easy policy to implement.
Which probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
I think it's a good idea.
Yes.
Now you've kind of got something we've talked about before in having a manager present at certain critical incidents. Remember, we're not talking throwing handcuffs on everybody for any reason. One of the things I would have in our policy, perhaps the next one, would be even with manager's discretion, you're only going to use them for the violently resisting or the violent subject. Let's take one of our prior scenarios where you get a bottle smashed over the head of a guy and then a guy kicks him and stomps on him and tries to run out. Your guard tackles the guy, holds him, another guard grabs his legs. This is a guy who would put handcuffs on.
So we're looking for a major violent incident. We're looking for someone who's resisting, someone who's at risk of fleeing the scene.
Well, fleeing the scene if they're tied to one of those number 1 or number 2 points you just said.
Okay.
Because now we're opening up that. And again, I trust you bouncers. I trust you in-house guards. But if I can give you good rules of thumb to follow, you're more likely to succeed. If I open that can of worms up that someone that might run on you, well, just because they stole someone's camera and they could run means you can put handcuffs on them. Legally, you could do it, but I want to limit it to the most violent, dangerous, hardcore, violent guys that you might have to wrestle down and hold. This is the guy that it took 4 of you guys to hold for 40 minutes while the police came. Or the guy that threw one of your bouncers, punched one of your guards, was trying to leave. As you're holding him, it took 2 or 3 of you to get him to the ground. This is the guy that needs to have handcuffs on, to keep everybody else safe.
Okay, so we covered in the policies what the types of events, the manager making the call. Maybe you also designate a supervisor, security supervisor, somebody in some sort of responsibility position. What other policies are we looking at?
I would have anyone that's going to use them on the team go through a training program. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I would have anyone that's going to use them on the team have worn them, have put them on, and this is part of the training package that we'll get into in a minute, but that's part of the policy that if you're going to be part of the team to use them, you have to have worn them.
So this is similar to security guards or police officers who use pepper spray.
Absolutely.
Put them through the same.
State of California, you go through chemical agent training, you got to get chemical agent sprayed. You got to get it on you, either whether they put it on you with a Q-tip under your eye, they spray it at you, whatever it is, you got to get it done so you can understand what the effects of these things are. It's the same thing I want as a policy. When my team is going to use handcuffs, I want them to understand when you put them on a violent suspect and they're on the ground, what you feel like, so you can now know what that guy feels like laying on the ground.
Yeah, and it's a major component of the actual training process.
The other policy I would implement is that everyone has a key. Everyone understands the medical considerations. Again, this is training, but I would list these in the policies, and we would train to those policies. So everyone would have a key. And not just that short little key that comes with the handcuffs you bought, that little bitty small silver one, the tactical key that is about 3 to 4 inches long. One of the videos I have that I use for my training is a guy, a guard that chased a guy, put cuffs on him, but he's got these big, giant, fat sausage fingers. He's wearing skinny jeans that he shouldn't be wearing. And he's trying to find that little bitty key in the heat of the moment after running and sweating and being out of his element out on the street and grabbing a guy, and he can't find his little key. You got to have that longer 3 to 4 inch tactical key that is easy to find, and you can get your big fingers around to use to loosen or change the position of these handcuffs. That would be one of my policies.
Robert, just on that note real quick, can we put up some recommendations for the specifications for what types of...
Well, there's on handcuffs?
Yeah.
Well, there's really only a couple types. There's the free chain handcuff that has one chain between them and hinge handcuffs. Those two types of handcuffs are predominantly the only ones out there, not thumb cuffs, not finger cuffs, but you have the hinged handcuffs, which really restricts movement. And then the only other variable are the size or the weight. You have 16 or 18 ounce, and you got some 22 ounce. That doesn't seem like a big difference, but that extra 4 to 5 ounces of metal on your wrists, it's thicker, it's sharper on the edges, and it's heavy. So it doesn't matter. They all have the same hole for the handcuff key. The handcuff key fits them all, whether it's on the side, the top, the back. I wouldn't put any restriction on that. If you want to go spend a little more and get a 22 ounce handcuff, fine.
And typically for a guard who's looking out to go buy a set of cuffs, what's the price range?
Anywhere from $29 to $59.
Okay. So with those policies in place, and obviously training is going to be a major component of deploying handcuffs. Let's talk a little bit about the training process.
And operators, guards, if you're listening to this and you're listening thinking, oh, good, this is good. Okay, handcuffing. I'm really not sure. I'm on the fence. One of the concerns, and I didn't mention it, but because I knew it would come up during the training discussion, is one of the biggest things that people worry about is, well, I heard about handcuffs that they can really hurt your wrist, and that's true. Or I heard about a guy who died when he was in handcuffs. That's true. Those two things happen. It can happen. Well, you've also heard of guys being hurt or dying when there were no handcuffs involved at the hands of guards. Whether a punch to the face, a kick to the stomach, and you've got a ruptured spleen or you've got a cracked skull. So I know those are concerns, but if you have the training, and by training I'm talking everyone's got a pair of handcuffs, and they get to play with them, use them, open them, close them, see how they work. I'm not talking about a police-style training program. As a 20-year cop, I went through handcuff training. It was many, many hours, many, many days and weeks. And we do things like what's called a felony hot stop, where you got your gun in a guy, one-handed gun, and you're telling them, stand with your legs shoulder width apart, put your hands on top of your head, interlock your
something
fingers.
like what you would see on a cops
Exactly.
TV show.
Exactly. That's not what a quote-unquote bouncer needs. They're never going to be in that position to give orders. Think of the scenario. And our training program is as real gets. When we do training, we'll put guys in the same position that they would find on a dance floor. 2 guys fighting, 3 girls fighting, and you got to get in there and break it up. You got to determine who the primary aggressor is at the moment you're there, who's going to resist you, who's pulling away. And when you find the one person you're going to hold detained for arrest, because this is a violent incident, and this is the one guy the manager has given you the approval to put these cuffs on because the police are coming, now we can start looking at the real type of training this guy needs. They don't need to stop and order the guy, okay, put your hands on your head, interlock your fingers, give me your left arm, put it behind your back. No. They need to know that once they have him on the ground and they've got his arms safely secure, okay, let's put the handcuffs on. That's not rocket science.
Because when you talk about a police style of an arrest, there's often, and I think the big difference is the police automatically carry a certain level of authority. Plus, they're carrying weapons.
They've got chemical agents, batons, nunchucks, other officers, dogs.
And the individual being arrested is going to be a lot more compliant, or, he's going to be in that, okay, this is the process I'm going to go through.
Correct.
In a nightclub or a bar environment, when you have a violent aggressor, he's not going to be cooperative. So it's a different style of handcuffing.
Absolutely. Now, as a cop, we did some of that in our mat room where we would simulate aggression, and we got pretty physical and violent. But I never experienced what I experienced as a cop putting handcuffs on someone violent until I was out in the field. When I had to arrest someone that was high on a chemical agent of some sort, on lots of alcohol and PCP, and fighting with you, and it took 3 cops to just get one arm handcuffed, that's what the training bouncers need. They're hopped up, they're amped up, they're high, drugs, drunk, alcohol, and he's already done something so egregious that he's hurt someone.
Yeah.
So that's what the training program should surround. It's okay to teach the guys some basics of clicking the handcuffs. You don't slam them on the wrist. That's a TV show thing, and cops that do that are numb nuts. Should never be done. You don't slam these cuffs on people.
Because that'll hurt.
It hurts like hell.
Yes.
And when cops do that, I say, stop for a minute. And if they're a rookie, I did it to them. And I'd say, this is what you just did. Feel this. Whack, ow. And they change the way they do it. That's not the way you do it. You're not meant to hurt the person. So training, everyone gets a pair.
The act of handcuffing is not an opportunity for you to retaliate.
No, absolutely not. And you cannot use it as, that's one of the fears of operators, that my guy will lose control, and while putting these things on, he goes too far. So the training should be pretty real, but we don't jump right into the dance floor fight. Everyone in a controlled setting will put handcuffs on each other, in the front, in behind.
And there's a lot of built-up discussion just surrounding the use of handcuffs.
Use of force, citizens detention, medical conditions, legal considerations, report writing considerations when they're used. In a training program that is really teaching your guys what and where, all those things must be included.
So for the operator who's considering going through a training process to get his guys qualified to use handcuffs, when they're looking for someone in their area, we said that typically there's 2 types of training, the police style and then one used for environment of nightclubs. Chances are I'm not going to have someone in my area who does this training.
You're not going to see them advertising on, in your newspaper on Craigslist. This is a specialty field. You may have guys that know how to do it. And frankly, in San Diego, in LA, I know 2 guys that do it, and both of them are retired academy instructors. But they've shrunk their course down from days, weeks, and months for police into a more compact for retail loss prevention agents, the guys that work at Walmart that use handcuffs, or bouncers, or concert guards, maybe personal protection guards. They have condensed the program down to what these guys need. So what I would recommend if you're in some other state, some other city, is contact your police officers union, contact the police academy, and find out if they've got anyone that they know is freelancing teaching this stuff.
And there's also associations around security That probably would be a good resource for individuals to find trainers.
There are, but be careful. You don't need to be careful. Just be sure to ask the right questions. Tell them.
And do your research.
I need this for a bouncer. Are you doing the police style handcuffing, or are you doing what my guy needs? If they say, I do what you need, ask them. Let me see your curriculum. Let me talk to you. Tell me how you're going to teach this to my guys. If you're not being informed, remember, we're talking about a detention, holding someone down with 3 guys, or handcuffs on a guy and holding him down with 1 guy. But both of those detentions, 3 guys or handcuffs, you have deprived this citizen from his freedom of movement. It's both legal. He committed a violent felony and you're holding this guy down. You're putting handcuffs on him. But if you're not asking the questions of the trainer, your guys may be trained wrong, and you've just accepted that imperfection of your trainer
and open yourself up to some potential liability.
Incredible.
So
liability.
the important lesson in that is to make sure that you vet your trainer correctly. Make sure that they're qualified to teach a class. Make sure that they're qualified to teach the class that is appropriate for the environment in which the handcuffs will be used, as well as even have an opportunity to ask them if you can evaluate their course before you actually offer it to your guys would be a good idea as well.
That's a great idea. And 2 of the things that you have to see, you have to have in every one of these classes, 2 things. Number 1, the things we talked about should be covered. But the 2 medical conditions that are the most common that lead to some sort of liability is when the handcuffs are put on the wrists and they're put on too tight, or they're not double locked, because all handcuffs will double lock so they won't continue to latch or ratchet and tighten up. And the second type of injury, other than that one, and that one is typically called handcuff neuropathy. And there's a nerve that runs. If you've ever played with crutches and you put them too far up underneath your arm and you lay on that for a while, you can kind of feel your arm going numb. That nerve runs down to your fingers.
Robert, are you playing with crutches again?
Well, it's better than the furry handcuffs, brother. So, but combining furry handcuffs with crutches is something.
Oh, I think there's some websites specifically for that.
And anyway, so that nerve that runs down the inside of your armpit down to your arms, the radial nerve is what it's called. You put those handcuffs on the wrist and it gets on too tight, you will injure that nerve. And nerves don't grow back overnight. It takes typically an inch a month, depending on the type of injury. And if you've injured that nerve and deprived it of oxygen too long from the handcuff being on too tight, they may never get that feeling back. That's one of the injuries that has to be discussed, talked about. And even with your guards, let them feel how tight these cuffs are, and then let them get them off so they don't themselves get any handcuff neuropathy. The second injury, and this one was pretty close to home for me in San Diego, is called positional asphyxia. Positional asphyxia, for those of you that don't know, is where the handcuffs are on someone who is violent. They're heavy breathing, they're fighting, they're breathing, and then they're laid on their stomach, handcuffs behind them, and the diaphragm slowly compresses. And the diaphragm is what, when you take a breath of air, fills up and you let it out. And the diaphragm will slowly decrease in size, allowing less air to get into the lungs. The diaphragm continues to depress while this guy lays on his stomach and the weight of his body is on him. And pretty soon he's not breathing. He's still laying there. He's not fighting. He's not combative. But within about 4 minutes, he's now unconscious.
And this is a common occurrence.
If you're using
even in law enforcement.
Not anymore. It's not. San Diego inadvertently used the word, and I hope I don't get in trouble, but they inadvertently killed 2 people in their custody. These guys were what's called maximum restrained. They're hog-tied, legs behind their back, hands behind their back, handcuffed, and they let these guys stay on their stomach in their police car, driving them to the jail. Story goes similar, and this is while I was on our department, that they got there and they looked back and the guy wasn't breathing. They got him up and he was dead. He had expired in the back of the police car, handcuffed. I actually saw this occur in a now client of mine, before they were a client of mine, where they fought with a former bodybuilder. He was intoxicated. 5 guards fought with him. It got down to 4 guards fighting with him. They got him handcuffed. They left him on the floor while they're kind of straightening themselves out and calming down. And while he's laying there, he expired. He died. And it was positional asphyxia. The guards had no training. They had no manager training. They were just carrying him and using him on this type of violent guy. and he died. So I know why operators are afraid. I'm talking about using a tool that can kill someone if you're not trained to do it. So you don't let anyone use them unless your people are trained. No positional asphyxia. You get them up on their back, get them up on their butt, put them on a curb, put them in a chair, and they're not going to die on you because of positional asphyxia. You put your finger between the cuff and the wrist. You double lock them. Nobody gets radial nerve neuropathy on their wrist. Now you don't have those two things to worry about.
So the main point is that, you know, there is some definite benefits to using handcuffs.
Major benefits.
Major benefits. It can be a useful tool, but the main thing that you got to think about is how the policies are rolled out and the training behind the actual usage of them. And so if you're considering using handcuffs within your venue, if you do use them, think about all these things that we talked about today. Think about your policies that are in place. Think about the training that your guards have received. And you might want to revisit this and consider coming back to it and doing some more training.
And I hope you can really understand, if you're an operator and you're still turned off by it, or maybe you're leaning towards it, if you ask your litigators or your attorneys, they're probably going to tell you, no, don't use them. It's just not worth it. Okay. But remember, when you get a violent guy and he's struggling, and it takes 3 of your guards, maybe a bartender, a manager, and a guard to hold a guy, that's 3 people out of commission for however long it takes the police to get there. And if it just so happens they're short-staffed, it's a busy night, you could have had one guy on this guy with handcuffs, sitting him in a chair, and he's being watched. The manager is calming down. The bartender's back to work. Handcuffs will save you so much. Here's the other thing. I'm sorry, Manny. Once he's handcuffed, there's no extra elbow swing. There's no extra.
Yeah, the argument needs to be made is once you've properly deployed the handcuffs, once you have him detained, you're actually keeping that individual safer.
He's not punching you. You're not having to lash out at him.
So there is an upside to it. When done properly, you can actually create a safer environment, and there is some real benefits to that. Another thing, Robert, that that happens within the training is once an individual is actually detained, handcuffs on, let's talk about the responsibility of the guard to make sure that individual is safe.
In every case of a bar, any business, you have to provide in any business a reasonably safe environment for your clientele. If you're running a barber shop, it's got to be reasonably safe. If you're running a bar, it's got to be reasonably safe. What is reasonable? Okay, you got lights, you got stair lighting, you got guards, you got policies. You're not over-serving alcohol. That's all reasonable. Well, if you're detaining people, it's got to be reasonable. You're not beating them down. You're not letting other people get cheap shots.
Because one of the actual cases or instances that we talk about in training is the individual who has handcuffs on, he's left on his own, and then gets clocked by
typically the guard is walking him out. Okay, everything's calm, everything's cool. You got a victim, 2 of the victim's friends, a bartender's giving him ice for his split open head. The police are on the way, medics are on the way. There's blood all over. The suspect is detained. Now he stood up with handcuffs. As he's walked to the door to get him out, one of the victim's friends clocks him upside his head.
Cheap shots him. And
he says, now your suspect, who just did all this damage, who's going to go to jail, now has a lawsuit against you because the bouncer held him while he got beat up.
Yeah, which is the way that they'll pose it.
Correct.
In the lawsuit.
So you're even more responsible and treat it like a baby. Treat him like a baby. He's got to be watched. He's got to be coddled. He's got to be taken care of, even though he's your suspect.
So yeah, that's an important consideration. After the fact of handcuffing an individual, detaining them, you're still responsible for the safety of that individual, and that's something else that needs to be trained and taught and carried through in your policies.
And 2 things, and I know we're wrapping up, but I want to leave you with. Number 1, practice on each other. Put them on each other on a regular basis and practice. Before you open up, before you get out there on the floor, put them on so you realize and remember and you get in that habit, that mental habit and repetition. The second thing, managers, operators, other extra guards, teach your people about the camera, using your cell phone. You got a violent guy on the ground, you got an extra guard, you got a bartender, you got a DJ. Number 1, you should have your outside cameras. But if you got a handheld camera, you're putting them on this guy, maybe that's another policy, that when we use handcuffs, we film it. You pull out, the manager pulls out
And
his
it's
cell
just an
phone.
extra level of protection.
And now you can show that you did protect him. You did provide the reasonably safe environment. No one cheap shotted him. You got in the way of the punch. You didn't kick him. You didn't do anything. You did double lock. You did get him up off his stomach.
The point being with this podcast, as with anything, there's a lot of important considerations, and the reason why we do these podcasts is we want operators, we want guards, we want the managers to think through these things and ask the right questions. And definitely, us here at Nightclub Security Consultants, we want to be a resource. And if there's something in this podcast that we didn't cover, or, as we have this discussion, you had a question pop up, we'd like to encourage you, please ask us that question. You can do that on the actual comment page for the podcast, on our podcast page. You can also do it in the comments on iTunes. So, Robert, anything else to add on to this topic?
I'm a proponent of handcuffs. Please, if you got any questions about them, don't hesitate to get to me. Read the blog on the Nightclub Security website, nightclubsecurity.com. Our blog, our podcast will be posted there. So,
and it is difficult for us to hit every point, in a 30-minute segment in this 1-hour podcast. So again, if you have questions, please let us know. On that note, we're going to take just a short break. When we come back, we'll make a couple of announcements and we'll wrap up the show. So stick with us just for a couple more minutes. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back. Just a couple of announcements, Robert, before we break the show. First of all, again, part of us doing this, the reason why we're doing this podcast is we're really wanting to build a community and a network of nightclub security professionals. So owners, guards, managers, operators. We really want to, because we feel like this profession just doesn't have the attention as far as resources that we would like it to. And
as important as this profession is, or within this industry, it just doesn't get the play that it should.
Yeah, and that was the whole premise behind starting this podcast, and that's the reason why we blog. And Robert publishes quite a few articles throughout the year in different publications, and so our main objective is to be a resource, and that resource is here for you, the community of the nightclub bouncer and guard and everybody else who's involved.
Take that second when you listen to this and you're done right now. Get on your computer and send this. We just had a couple of things retweeted from people we don't know, and we'll let them know on Twitter about that.
Yeah, and this is working. I can see the momentum building with just the downloads from the podcast. Every week, every time we do a show, there's more and more people getting involved. And as we build this community, as we can create more resources, there's a lot of advantages to it down the road. So do us that favor.
Get us on Facebook at Bouncer Training.
Yeah, so add us on Facebook, add us on Twitter, which is at Bouncer Coach. Pass along the podcast, share it with a friend, subscribe to us on iTunes. You can find us at Nightclub Security. And if you do that for us, we really do appreciate it, because this is something that we're doing for the community, and we want to spread the word. So what else, Robert? Anything else?
Happy holidays, buddy.
That's right. So by the time you guys get this podcast, the holiday season will be right there, and we would like to wish everybody happy holidays, Merry Christmas.
Don't mean to offend anyone,
well,
but
I know. I'm trying to cover it all here.
That's
Happy
right.
Kwanzaa.
Christ and Christmas.
Did I say Happy Hanukkah already?
Yep.
All right.
Said it twice. Now you got to say the other ones twice. God, go put your furry handcuffs on.
Kwanzaa, Christmas.
Again, put your furry handcuffs on.
I don't have free handcuffs, but I still want to know how. When I watch you, I don't get that comment.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
We're going to try to get another show out before the end of the year, but until then, I'm Manny Marquez.
I'm Robert Smith.
And be safe.